Now, when you see the word essay on my video title, don't get too worked up about it. I don't like the word essay either. It reminds me of school. This is not school. All an essay is really is a collection of thoughts on a given subject on a given day. So in today's essay, we're going to look at the Burkes once more. I just felt for the purpose of balance, I needed to look at the negative or downside of the Burkes and their behavior. So, you know, as I see it anyway from my perspective. So let's just get on with that. For those of you who are mechanically minded, you'll know that this is a wrench. You're probably wondering, why do I have a wrench in my hand? Well, look, I'm actually going somewhere with this, so just stay with it. I just want to start off with a story. Now, all these things are actually connected, so just stay with the video. When I was in my early 20s, I was with this girl, and one evening we ended up in Mitchelstown, and we needed to come from Mitchelstown back to Cork. And so we were actually waiting for the bus. We were just going to get on the bus that was going from Dublin to Cork. And at this time as well, I was a kind of, I was still quite young, obviously, and I was a kind of a new Christian also. And the bus came and we got on the bus. And when I got on the bus with this girl, I just saw about halfway down the bus, there was this guy, and I kind of recognized his face because at that time I used to go to a free Christian church, it was non-denominational, or I'd started going there at least, And this guy, who was also a Christian, used to come down from Dublin to that particular place and he would give the odd sermon. So when we got on the bus, he obviously knew my face or recognized me and just waved, and I just waved back. And that was the last of it, or so I thought. So myself and the girl sat down. She was sitting by the window. I was sitting on the aisle. And after a short time, I think maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, this guy suddenly appeared at my side. For about 15 minutes, or 10 or 15 minutes, he stood there trying to convert this girl I was with to Christianity in the middle of a bus. Now, at that time, as I said, I was quite young. I didn't have the maturity that I have now. And, inside me, I thought, this guy, why doesn't this guy just go away? This is really embarrassing for me. It's embarrassing for the girl. But the guy just kept going. He just didn't know when to stop. It didn't occur to him that, this is really inappropriate behavior, to be doing such a thing on not just a public place, but a place that is just very confined on a bus. And the bus was actually full. At this period in my life, as I said, I was quite young. I just didn't have the skills or the wherewithal or the maturity just to tell the guy to get lost and just go away. I mean, if something like that happened to me now, I would just say, this is inappropriate. Please just go away. Don't approach me again on the bus, please, But I just didn't have the wherewithal at this time in my life, This kind of personality is very indicative of someone who, and we all know these type of people, they just don't have that wisdom or that sense of an internal mechanism that says, I've gone far enough, I now need to back off, He just didn't seem to have that. And I've heard of other occasions, similar situations involving this particular person as well, from other people I knew. So it was very awkward for me, and I was kind of a little bit apologetic to the girl that I was with. She obviously wasn't very receptive either to what he had to say, which is completely understandable, The point is that, we all know people in life like that. They just don't have the cop on to know when to stop or to back off. And this is where my wrench story comes in. And this is all going to relate to the Burke's essay as well. So, back to my wrench. Now, this is not an ordinary wrench. It's a special wrench. It's called a torque wrench. And what that means is that with a normal wrench, what you do, if you're tightening bolts, you can tighten away to your heart's content, But what can happen eventually is that the bolt, you can tighten something so tightly that the bolt will actually break. And whatever you're fastening the bolt into, it could be a car part or something, that'll probably break as well. So you'll break everything in essence. And what a torque wrench does is it's got this kind of dial here, and there are various measurements here, and they're measured in Newton meters. Newton meter is all it is just a measurement of the strength of a bolt, you know. And usually manufacturers will say, for example, in my car, the oil sump plug, that has to be tightened to 25 Newton meters. So when I'm tightening the bolt, and I have this set to 25 Newton meters, when I reach that tightness, this device or this torque wrench will just make an audible click, and I'll know then, okay, that's the time to stop. That's the time to back off, you know, because if I go any further, I'll damage the bolt or the oil sump. But if I leave it too loose, then the nut might come off while I'm driving and or undo itself, and all the oil will come out of the engine. So that's the value of a torque wrench. And the reason I'm kind of bringing this up, because this kind of relates back to that gentleman on the bus. You know, he didn't have this internal torque wrench. And I think this idea of torquing your behavior, let's say, that only comes from life experience and from wisdom. And sometimes, and relating this to the Burkes in my essay, sometimes when I look at the Burkes, I think, you know, they don't have this internal torque mechanism that tells them, okay, we've done enough, it's time to back off. I hear the clicking sound, the bolt is tight enough. Because there are some people in life that they just over tighten things over, and they just turn people off, you know. And I suppose that's kind of my fear with the Burkes sometimes when I look at their behavior, that they just go just that little bit too far and don't seem to have the wisdom to know when, you know, it's time now to stop. You know, you can be someone who's I'll just put this down for a second. You can be someone who's very, very well educated. You could have, you know, very significant academic accomplishments. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have wisdom. I think wisdom comes over a long period of time from life experience. Now, I wrote this essay a few days ago, and the day after I wrote this essay, I just happened to listen to Christian Morris's analysis of their behavior, this gala in Washington. And Christian put it in a kind of interesting way. He just said, look, I think the Burkes just need to get a new script. And I suppose that in some ways just comes into alignment, not just with what I wrote the day before I heard that, but it comes into alignment with my illustration of the torque wrench. You know, sometimes when you hear the click in the wrench, you just need to get a new script. So let's just get into the essay. And as I said earlier, the whole purpose of this essay really is, I know I kind of wanted to move on from this subject, but after I saw their ejection from the gala in Washington, you know, I really had to think about them for a few days, because I was concerned, you know, maybe some of what I'd written isn't entirely accurate. So I think really what I needed to do was just look at the Burkes from another perspective, just from the downsides of the Burkes. And I think there has to sometimes be a bit of balance, and we really need to sometimes look at both sides of the coin. And that's what this essay is about. In the Second World War, what the Japanese pilots, or what the Japanese were so desperate at the time, they would actually crash their own airplanes into the American warships, you know, not just hitting targets on the ships, but also destroying themselves in the process. So, you know, sometimes we can just wind things up so far that not only do we destroy what we're trying to destroy, but we destroy ourselves in the process, and it can become very self-destructive. So the title I've given for today's essay is Kamikaze, Burke style. They're like people who, they kind of snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, you know. It wasn't on my radar to write another essay on the Burkes, not at this time anyway. In my previous videos, I for the most part wrote of them in a favourable light. However, following my second video essay, which was a short off-the-cuff reaction to their departure to Washington, they proceeded yet again to do their Burke thing and found themselves being ejected from a gala event there. After seeing that, I began to doubt some of what I'd written and gave the Burke some further thought. I realized that in the interest of balance, and also as a Christian myself, I needed to write a third video essay, but this time examining the downsides of what the Burkes are about, which is what you are listening to now. Yesterday, I listened to John Waters in an interview where he referred to the Burke family as the salt of the earth. He's quite generous when he speaks of them, saying their courage seems to increase with every passing moment. They do indeed have courage, and I cannot deny that, and also have the courage to follow their convictions with action. There are times, though, when I wonder about the validity of their behaviour, as it sometimes doesn't quite sit with me. I'm of course speaking through the lens of being a Christian myself, so I have a good understanding and experience of the mentality in some of these circles. John Waters' comments were made on the day of their party crashing episode in Washington. Now, I don't normally listen to Thomas Sheridan, but I did listen afterwards to his view in that particular incident. He asserted that despite their academic accomplishments, some of their behaviour could be put down to a lack of social skills. Maybe there's something in that, but I'm not sure. However, it's an interesting point to raise, as the Burkes do have a certain recurring pattern of conduct in particular situations. Thomas also made some other points about Christianity in general, which for me were blatantly false, but I won't get into that now as it's not the topic of this essay. I'm personally not shy in confronting people if the need arises. Much more so now compared to when I was younger, when I would try to avoid confrontation. Much of that came from a low self-confidence which fell away as I matured. It took me time to grow out of that, and such growth often comes from life experience. I firmly believe, I'm speaking now as a Christian, that God can and does orchestrate circumstances in one's life in order to mold one's character, forcing you sometimes into uncomfortable situations. These situations can in turn cause you to re-examine yourself and confront aspects of your character that are lacking, or maybe that you're not aware of up to that moment. That has been my experience anyway when I look back over my years as a believer. There is a caveat here, however, and that is as follows. There are those who do not wish to re-examine themselves, and consequently end up getting stuck at one particular personal obstacle, sometimes for years. This is how the Israelites ended up wandering around the desert for 40 years, even though it was only a short distance to their promised land. In this biblical story, those who had not obeyed God had to die off first, because they would not be allowed to enter the land that had been promised to them. In my first essay on Enoch Burke, and on the Burkes in general, I wrote that when I looked at them, I often thought that I would not have gone about things in the way they seem to have done. I would see all their positive qualities, but at the same time have personal doubts about the way they conducted themselves. I would think to myself that this is bordering on Gemma O'Doherty territory, and is doing more harm than good. Screaming and shouting can indeed bring you attention and get the media to take note of your existence. But does it really further your cause in the way that is needed? I don't think so. Often, it can turn the very people that you need to be on your side against you. There have been times when the Burke family come across as quite dignified and reasonable, but then suddenly, without warning, matters descend into chaos, often unnecessarily, when little is achieved except for garnering a little more attention. Sheridan's view is that their primary goal is to get Enoch Burke his job back. While that may indeed be one of their goals, I'm not sure it's their primary one, because their tactics are a pattern that have existed long before the school legal case came around. I believe that they have wound the clock up so tightly now that I cannot see Burke ever getting his job back. They have pissed off too many people in key positions. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I hope that I am. But we have to get real and see things as they are, not as we'd like them to be. I believe it would have been better if Enoch Burke had accepted the court order at face value and not continually turned up at the school, an act which was always going to aggravate matters. He was, and is, on full pay, and could have used that valuable time to prepare his case. By repeatedly turning up, I think he has damaged his standing, pardon the pun, and his image, implying that he is above the law, simply because he does not agree with the order. I can only conclude that there is an element of pride at play here. Now, hear me correctly. I'm not saying that all court orders or laws have to be slavishly obeyed. Not at all. I addressed this issue in an older video, How Ireland's Appeasing Churches Failed the People, which you can still find on this channel. This was written in the context of COVID, but the same principles apply. Whether Mr. Burke or his family agreed with it or not, coming into alignment with that court order would have given him the space to gather his thoughts and come up with a strategy that might have won him his case against the school and secure his job without all the agitation. My view is that the school's implementation of compelled speech was always wrong, so things were favourable for Burke from the get-go. But sometimes people can become their own worst enemy and derail themselves in the process. They can get in their own way. This is the other side of the coin as I see it. Poor judgment. Thomas Sheridan did make one good point regarding the Burke family unit, saying that it may be quite insular. I can't say that for certain, but I've never seen them on any kind of media, social or otherwise, where there was a non-family third party standing with them in their corner. I'm not saying there wasn't, I'm merely saying that I personally never saw that anywhere. While a tight family unit can indeed be a healthy thing when one needs support and advice from those who care about you, there's also the danger of it becoming isolationist and imbalanced, with all outside views being discarded and ignored. Sometimes, taking advice only from those within your own circle of influence can bring about a false sense of security in the certainty of one's cause and position. You are in a space where everyone is reaffirming one another and where any outside influence, even if it's healthy, cannot penetrate. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14 says, quote, "In the abundance of counselors, there is victory." If you are taking counsel only from those with whom you agree, then that is not genuine counsel. It is affirmation and reinforcement. The case of the Asher's Bakery is an interesting one in that I believe there's a close correlation between it and the case of Enoch Burke. Asher's Bakery in Belfast refused to bake a cake for Gareth Lee, an LGBT activist, which would have had to include the slogan, "Support Gay Marriage," written on it. The family firm, Asher's, said that the slogan contravened their Christian beliefs. In 2018, the UK Supreme Court found in favour of the bakery. The similarity is striking in that Enoch Burke was requested to refer to a student as they/them verbally, while the bakery was requested to do something similar in written form. Asher's Bakery, who eventually won their case, did not go around with placards, shouting at politicians or having themselves carted out of courthouses. No, they quietly prepared their case with a good legal team, conveyed their position to the public as best they could, and presented themselves in a respectful manner to the judiciary. They won decisively, and Mr. Lee went on to have his appeal thrown out by the European Court of Human Rights. I cannot help but wonder whether Enoch Burke could not have taken a similar approach. There would have been no 500 days in prison and no €80,000 fines. Outside independent counsel might have advised him of such and led him on a more sure footing. Human nature at times has an impulsive need to physically rebel when one feels an injustice has been done, but that can be unwise and short-sighted and land you in the mire, whether your case is just or not. There's a lot to be said for self-control, and as Christians we're told in 2 Timothy chapter 1, and I quote, "God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but of power, love, sound judgment, and self-control." End of quote. Being a Christian is not about being passive. This is where people like Thomas Sheridan go wrong, because their understanding of biblical faith is very limited. if there is indeed any understanding at all. While on many levels I support the Burke family, and I've laid that out in my previous essays, their continual craving or need to seek out martyrdom is a concern for me. All Christians are aware of persecution that may await them, as Christianity is the most persecuted faith in the world. We can see examples such as the 70 believers that were beheaded recently in the Congo for their faith, or what is now also unfolding in Syria. It's possible that the Burke family see their current predicament as a form of persecution also. But I ask, how much of that have they brought on themselves by their own behavior and actions? In the course of my life, I have often come across those who continually search out things they disagree with so that they can oppose them. You know the type I mean. They like to agitate, and they are found in all walks of life. I have seen this also in Christian circles on occasion. It's an unfortunate facet of human nature, and a certain self-awareness needs to be employed to extract this liability from one's character. I sometimes have the impression that this family continually seek out what they perceive to be wrongdoing, regardless of how inconsequential, so as to confront it at every opportunity. The Bible in Ephesians 5 indeed tells us to have nothing to do with deeds of darkness, but rather to expose them. Now, I also agree that not all practices should be ignored, but I've also learned over time that occasionally one has to turn a blind eye to certain things for the sake of the bigger picture. And I've come across many over the years that fail to see the bigger picture in many circumstances. In life, not every I has to be dotted and not every T has to be crossed. There has to be balance, because we live in a world that we have to share with other people who may have complex personal histories and backgrounds. Not everything is as black and white as we may think it is. If we are constantly agitating over the most minor infractions, we will become like the boy who cried wolf, and end up becoming nothing more than an annoyance and a nuisance to others. Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time to keep silent and a time to speak. That's where good judgment and discernment play a role. Christ in Matthew says, "Whoever does not welcome you nor listen to your message, as you leave the house or city, shake its dust off your feet." In other words, move on and get over it. I'm not saying that Enoch Burke should have turned a blind eye to the email he received, the one that he felt was compelling him to address an individual by certain pronouns. Not at all. I'm merely saying that we need to discern when it is time to restrain our cannon, just like they did in old wooden battleships, to stop them moving around and keep them fixed on their target. Otherwise, we ourselves become like loose cannons, firing off in all directions, hitting things we shouldn't be hitting, causing unnecessary damage, or missing the intended target entirely. Following their removal from that gala dinner in Washington, which happened after I'd published my second video essay on the Burkes, I began to worry that they were now themselves becoming loose cannons, going down the path of folly, aimlessly firing off at anything that moves or finds itself blocking their way. This strategy is not winning them any friends or favors. That should be obvious. Sometimes you have to box clever. In these days of social media, one's reputation, or at least how one is being perceived, is even more important. Because if you are in the position that the Burkes are, you have to presume that you are continually being watched. Following their ejection at the gala, I watched a short vlog by Martina and Isaac Burke outside that function. As always, they spoke smartly and eruditely and made good points laying out why they were there. However, while I support them in the broader sense, there can be a sin of omission in their narrative, and we need to be intellectually honest about that, whether we support them or not. Martina Burke in this vlog stated that Enoch had been imprisoned while refusing to endorse transgenderism, and Isaac remarked that the Attorney General planned to, quote, strip Enoch Burke of his salary and livelihood after refusing to affirm transgenderism. There are some semantics at play here in their language that need to be unpacked. While Enoch Burke's refusal may indeed be the foundation stone in this drama, it is not the reason he went to prison or why his salary is under threat. Let me repeat that. It is not the reason why he went to prison or why a judgment is being sought against his salary towards that €80,000 fine. While this may seem incongruent when compared to my position laid out in my first essay, The Cowards for Christ, both positions can be true at once, and we have to call a spade when it comes to the technical reasons behind all of this. By going against this court order, Enoch Burke chose this when he did not have to. He had other options. He could have chosen the path of Asher's Bakery, which, as I've stated already, may have been the better option. Had I been in his position, this is probably the road I personally would have taken. What I'm saying here does not, of course, nullify in any way Mr. Burke's courage or my position in the Cowards for Christ essay. Courage has to be coupled with solid judgment and wisdom, and not be given free rein lest it be allowed to stampede off course into recklessness. Self-sacrifice can be a noble characteristic that is applauded throughout history and in the Bible itself. We've seen it in the lives of Christian martyrs such as Sophie Scholl and Dietrich Bonhoeffer under the tyranny of Nazism. However, when one does not heed wise and balanced counsel and employ sound judgment, the road of self-sacrifice can become self-destructive and cloudy, hard to find. Instead, we can find ourselves on a road with no way back. The road to Kamikaze.